All right, so we're going to get started here. Just in the interest of time, we have a lot to share with you today. So my name's Eustace Rappel. I work for the Nature Conservancy. I'm based out of San Francisco, and lovely for you all to join us today in this share out on the Invisible Reservoir report, which features an analysis of how nature-based solutions can contribute to the water security of the Sao Paulo, specifically in the Cantareira Water Basin. We will be shortly introducing our different panelists today. As sort of ground rules, I would love for folks to share any questions they have throughout the presentation. We have a whole section on Q&A at the end of the presentation allocated. So to the extent you have questions that come up during it, please just put them in the chat and I'll log them and then go through those in order. As a starting point for this presentation, just at a very high level, greater than half of global cities have significantly degraded watersheds. And by this we mean that they have natural environments that no longer provide the ecosystem services such as, flood attenuation or improved water quality or interannual water regulation. Those kinds of services are things that nature provides, and due to things like urban sprawl, due to things like deforestation, due to things like poor territorial planning, there's a well-documented trends of those basins that feed the source watersheds that then feed that become the water supply of our populations. Those have been hit by these land use changes. On top of that, climate change is making, in many places around the world, rainfall more sporadic as well as less frequent, things that are analyzed in this report. So it's obviously a major priority to ensure that adequate drinking water supply is available to populations around the world. I heard a colleague of mine recently say that if climate change is a shark, water is the teeth. And so, and indeed, in the way that people experience climate change, severe water security risk is oftentimes the first way in which it shows up, both for drinking purposes as well as irrigation and so forth. Interestingly, this is not something necessarily that conventional engineering solutions are not necessarily sufficient to build our way out of. In many cases today, source watershed is so polluted that it doesn't matter how many chemicals you pour into the watershed anymore in terms of your treatment operations. You need to fix the integrity of the source watershed. And so there's a new framework that has been around since the sort of the mid-2010s called nature-based solutions that is all about, hey, if we quantify the benefit to humans of nature, can we get the humans to pay for it? And can we, if we articulate those benefits very specifically to humans, can we get the humans to care about it? And for watersheds, this is really a water security focused argument that we're presenting here, is if we articulate the value to water security of these nature-based solutions, can we integrate these and mainstream these as part of the water sector, which is overall an $800 billion sector? So can we move a small piece of that $800 billion into investments in nature, which are sort of the bedrock of integrity for these systems? So to start off with, I'd love to introduce my fellow report authors, and I'll start with Sejong. Sejong, can you introduce yourself and where you're based?
Sure. Thank you so much for that introduction. So when I began this project, I was a postdoctoral fellow at the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center of University of Maryland. Currently, I'm a physical scientist at U.S. Geological Survey. And I'll hand it off to Claudio.
Hi, everyone. I am Claudio Clems. I work at the Nature Conservancy in the Brazil business unit. I am part of our external affairs team, and lately I've been involved in the interface between conservation and the sanitation sector and water security. So working with water utilities, regulators, basically bringing up the importance of this sector to invest in watershed protection. So I invite Eileen to present herself, to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I am from Brazil Nature Conservancy, Brazil. I am part of the science team, and I am freshwater specialist, and I work a lot with the models and something more technical. I will pass to Bruna.
Hi, everybody. Good morning from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I work also in the same team of Eileen in the Brazil science team. I'm an environmental economist and with a PhD in water resources economics. And I developed the economic part of this analysis. Please.
Wonderful. Thanks all for introducing yourself. So the first question I have to the group, and specifically aimed at Claudio. So the subject of this study is the Cantareira Water Supply System in the São Paulo Metropolitan Area of Brazil. Claudio, can you please tell us more about this water supply system, its importance, and what the objectives are of the study?
Yeah, sure.
Advancing to the next slide.
Natalia, can you put the next slide, please? Yeah, the Cantareira Water Supply System, it's located in southeastern Brazil, as you can see in the map, between the states of São Paulo and Minas Gerais. This system covers an area of 228,000 hectares. This is roughly equivalent to 3 times the size of New York City. The system, it is composed of 4 interconnected reservoirs, each one fed by its respective subcatchment. And this whole area encompasses the 8 municipalities. The upstream catchment is comprised of a matrix of urban and rural areas. The rural areas mostly dominated by degraded pasture areas, some silviculture, and also remainings of the Atlantic forest, which only 12% is left today in Brazil. So also a very important reservoir of biodiversity. The Cantareira system, it supplies water to around 47% of the São Paulo Metropolitan Area. This means nearly 7.5 million people. So you can have a dimension of the importance of this territory. In the years of 2014 and 2015, the worst drought in this system history has been recorded. This extreme event has been known as the water crisis. So in this period, the Cantareira system capacity has been reduced from 33 to 14 cubic meters per sector. And at this point, the system reached the 4 reservoirs dead storage capacity. So during this time, basically the water utility pumped mud into the water treatment plant. And afterward, it was the population that bear the costs of this increasing water treatment costs. Natalia, you can put the next slide. Regarding the objectives, it was these 5 objectives that you can see here in the screen. So first, to highlight the potential hydrological benefits arising from investment in nature-based solutions. Second, to propose a prioritization of nature-based solutions interventions inside this territory. Third, to perform an economic analysis of how this hydrological benefits would be reflected in local economy. And then to support, use these arguments to support the coordination and development of territorial planning processes, the territorial planning policies. And ultimately to support the allocation of financial resources for nature-based solution investments coming from the water tariff. So, to that end, we used a set of environmental models that has been deployed to estimate how the Cantareira system would respond to extreme climatic events if counterfactual land use scenarios were in place instead of the current land use, which has been used as our baseline.
Thanks so much for that, Claudio. And given that this is a very complex study, and I'm hoping Natalia or someone else, if they could put the link in the chat so people can explore on their own. But in lieu of everyone reading this themselves, Claudio, can you share with us the high-level conclusions that were reached by this report?
Yeah, sure. Well, by providing this technical perspective on hydrological processes, the economic impacts, and policy implications, the results we present demonstrate that investing in watershed protection positively impacts water security. So one of the highlights of the study is the forest water quantity nexus, something that's sometimes rare to find in literature. You see lots of evidence about forest water quality, but not forest water quantity. So this is one of the highlights of this study. And it also demonstrates how this careful landscape planning can mitigate economic impacts of extreme climate events. And also how the nature-based solution benefits are intervention scale dependent. So as our team will present here, we use different scenarios, and this is also have been found. The more you invest, the more you intervene in the landscape, the better results you get. So in general, the most precise way of summarizing the results of this study is the following, and this is just one of the highlights. So if one of the alternative land use scenarios with nature-based solutions used in this study had been prevalent in the Cantareira system over the last 30 years, then the 2014-2015 water crisis could have been mitigated by a 33% increase in the water contained in the hydrological system, and resulting in a 28% reduction in the economic losses owing to the drought. So this is just one of the highlights. I really urge the audience to get the study, take the time, read the report, explore it in depth, debate it with your peers, because there is a wealth of information and technical details embedded in it.
Great, thanks, Claudio. Next question goes to Sejong. So this report was accomplished through the sincere efforts of an interdisciplinary team across multiple organizations. So can you share with us, Sejong, some of the key ingredients that went into making this happen?
Great, thanks for that question. That's a great question. So through the stakeholder engagement process involving scientists and policymakers, as well as the water utility company and state administration, various environmental simulation models were developed, as Claudio talked about. And those models were developed to elicit and represent multiple environmental, economic, and policy perspectives. So one of our goals was to develop a mutual language using these models as a boundary object to communicate and establish common goals of water resources management. So in order to accomplish that goal of reaching common management goals through the stakeholder engagement process, first, we compiled multiple models that represent different environmental processes, from climatic cycle and fog capture to time variant water balance for various landscape management scenarios, including those implementing nature-based solutions, such as conservation of native vegetation and reforestation of source watershed. Secondly, we exchanged data that were critical to making more accurate predictions about hydrological responses to these various scenarios. And particularly important data was reservoir inflow monitoring from the operators of the water supply company. So that was really important that we worked with stakeholders and exchanged data. We also work with academic collaborators, using various environmental data, including satellite and remote sensing data, to evaluate and understand ecologic and hydrologic impacts of land cover changes in our source watershed, as well as surrounding landscape. I also want to note that our collaborative modeling framework was iterative, as the diagram illustrates. And the modeling framework was iterative to provide a robust scientific support for decision-making. What does that entail? Well, stakeholders are engaged throughout the project to co-develop the overall modeling framework, including compiling necessary input data and selecting various models and parameterization of those models, as well as calibration and validation processes. We conducted meetings with stakeholders throughout the project, presented the progress of model development, and learned from them by listening to their feedback, what's really necessary for these models to capture. And the technical team went back to drawing board to implement those feedback in various aspects of model components, as Eileen will later talk about. And the stakeholders helped to evaluate different landscape scenarios and interpret the model simulation outputs. So the model, we will present the model outputs and we will understand it in one way, and stakeholders will shed different lights to it. And stakeholders help to, so they help to evaluate different landscape simulation model outputs. So in other words, the effectiveness of the stakeholder engagement really depended on the extent of mutual learning, iterative interaction, and sometimes conflict resolution and levels and duration of collaboration, all of which contributed towards building common ground given diversity of interests, relationships, and physical, social, and political, and cultural influences. So finally, as a result, the multidisciplinary team and stakeholder engagement in developing the environmental simulation models was one of the key ingredients in evaluating and accomplishing common goals of water resources management.
Thanks, Sejong. So moving on to from how the collaboration worked to how this actually got done. Eileen, it's incredibly complex to articulate the value of nature, because there's things like land use forecast modeling, there's things like mapping even the nature-based solutions in the landscape, and there's articulating the benefits of the portfolio, and that it's across a range of different water security challenges, whether it's groundwater flows or surface water, et cetera. So, and I know there's also like a fog capture element here. So it's really like all of the things that could be addressed by such a study. And so, Eileen, if you could walk us through the different models and tools you use to articulate the ecosystem services with the portfolio.
Sure, Justus. I will try to explain everything because it's a lot. We tried to do that around 2 years, and we use different models to try to understand what is happening in the system. Hydrologic is very difficult, very complicated, and we start to utilize 5 models and tools to quantify the impact of nature-based solution on hydrologic flow and water security in the Cantareira system. As you know in the figure, the first model that we used was the Dinâmica Eagle. The Dinâmica Eagle is an environmental modeling platform from one university here in Brazil. And this tool was used to evaluate historical land use and land cover changes, and also predict future changes. We understand that not all the parameters or in the water are contabilized in this region, because we have fog capture a lot in the dry season, and we try to understand that. And for capture this, we use the Fiesta model. The Fiesta model, abbreviated from fog interception for the enhancement to stream flow in tropical areas, was employed to estimate the potential water input resulting from the adoption of nature-based solution with the watershed. Also, we understand that we need to optimize the places where we are going to do the nature-based solution. For that, we use the RIOS software. The RIOS software is short for Resource Investment Optimization System, and was used to identify priority interventions areas where the hydrological gains could be better or most favorable for groundwater and base flow. To compare, to try to comprehend the hydrological improvements, we employed two hydrological models. The HMS, that is short for Hydrological Model System for Hydrological Engineer Center. The HMS provide a general understanding of how intervention scenarios impacted flow and reservoir yield. But we know that sometimes the improve in water maybe is in the storage, and we didn't find this with this model, and we started using also the SWOT. The SWOT is abbreviated from Soil and Water Assessment Tool, and we use to estimate hydrological balance and storage in different components. SWOT has more detailed simulation capabilities, showing that a significant portion of water storage in the Cantareira system was in the soil and aquifer layers. Like you see in the slide, we use various landscape intervention scenarios involving different spatial distributed allocation of nature-based solution. We I will explain just 3 of them because we did more than 3. But in these 3, we have the baseline for comparison was the Cantareira system 2018 land use and uncovered, derived from remote sensing data, and we have 2 scenarios with different interventions. They're in different offer of native vegetation restoration in some ecological sensitive areas, and we did that trying to use the Brazilian Forest Code. That the Brazilian Forest Code mentioned that we need to conserve different areas for hydrological restoration. After that, like I told before, we use the RIOS optimized intervention scenario, and these RIOS give more focus in the impactful indication where the benefits of investment we need to put. The RIOS scenario involved an intervention portfolio of 32,085 hectares. That is about 14% of the Cantareira system area across the basins. And when we put these 3 scenarios and we compare in the 2 hydrological models, and after that we start to analyze all the results, and we saw that the most important, they highlighted the potential, the benefits of native restoration and other nature-based solution is particularly during the drought events. If you see the graph, we found that the groundwater and the storage is the most important component here in Cantareira system. It indicates that native vegetation restoration mitigate stream flow events, reduce peak flows, and increase base flows. However, when analyzing annual water production, marginal differences were observed. But these distinctions are significant because they show an improving distribution of water throughout the year. With decreased flow during the rainy season, more water is stored, becoming available during the dry season. And this is important for the Cantareira River system because we want more water when the dry season is. Natalia could put the another slide. And you see here this graph show that Claudio told us before. You see here we have an improve of water in surface and groundwater volumes. When we compare the baseline with the RIOS scenario, And if we put this in average, we have more or less 33% of increase. And if you see the graph below, you see that this is more significant when we have drought events like 2014, until 2016. This year was very dry season here in Cantareira system. We didn't have rainy, and in this moment we need water. The scenarios show us that this moment was the particular, this increase was important for us because in this moment we didn't have water in another basin also, and we need to buy more water. But if we have nature-based solution, we have more water, and maybe it will be important piece for the economic analysis. If you see here this graph, and you could picture this graph, because Bruna after me is going to try to explain how we use this to estimate the economic cost of the drought. Thank you, Justus. I hope
Thanks, Eileen.
Well, I hope.
No, that's great. So in conclusion, the team relied on multiple hydrological models, in this case, HEC HMS and SWAT specifically, and a bunch of different additional tools to model things like land use change, fog capture, as well as a prioritization run. Those yielded 4 different scenarios, and the scenarios and the ecosystem services provided by those scenarios were then compared to one another, because you need to create a baseline scenario, and then what is the additionality of the NBS intervention portfolio. In this case, we're going to be specifically talking next about the Rios optimized scenario, this 32,000 hectare. And then what happened next was to do a economic evaluation of how that Rios optimized scenario would compares to the baseline scenario, and comparing the benefits of that scenario against the costs of implementing this overall nature-based solutions program. So with that backdrop, Bruna, can you share a bit about the development of this economic analysis? And this is particularly germane because infrastructure at large, and the water sector specifically, is ruled by cost-benefit analyses. The way to find your way into a successful investment out of a master planning study is to show that you are a competitive cost-benefit ratio relative to the other options. So Bruna, if you could share with us about how the economic evaluation was conducted and what it yielded. Thanks.
Thank you, Justus, also Eileen and Sejong and Claudia that explained all the steps of our analysis. And the hydrological results was really important for us to make a reflection of how we can make this valuation, the economic valuation. So our challenge were exactly to estimate the benefits of the increased additionality of the additional volume of surface and groundwater in the Cantareira system. So for this, we developed, as Justus says, a cost-benefit analysis. So the first step we estimated the cost of the investment in the restoration of the area that Rio scenario suggests, that were 32,085 hectares, right, of area of restoration. And after the cost, the challenge were to value these benefits. So the benefits of the increase, the hydrological, the water storage, right, the hydrological benefits. So what we did, that we estimate the economic cost of the water crisis along 2014 and 15, because we found that we had a decrease in the economic activity of the industry and the water sector. So this is the curve, the red curve, demonstrate the observed data of the gross value added of the industry, and the sum of the gross value added of the industry and the net value added of the water supply sector So we use the gross value added and the net value added as an economic parameter, because it's a income surplus that represents the gain, the economic gain and surplus of the sectors. And since we have those data of all the municipality that are served by the Cantareira system, we get this estimation. So to do this, we needed to make a counterfactual analysis as with a scenario without water crisis, which is the dashed blue curve, right? So the counterfactual scenario, it's the tendency of the gross value added and the net value added between 2002 until 2013. And then having this projected, we found which would be the economic values without water crisis. So the difference between the dashed blue curve and the red curve, it's our cost of the water crisis. So, and then we found it was around $450 million for these 2 years of water crisis. So after having this number, this value and estimated, the second step were to make a regression. We made a regression model with considering one of the variable of the regression model were the volume of the surface and groundwater. So we have make a regression considering the observed volume, and then which will be and how it interferes in the gross value added and net value added of both sectors. So, and having estimated our coefficients, we estimated which will be the economic parameters with the scenario real, so with the benefits, with the water storage. So, and after this, we have found an economic avoided cost, right? So we achieved around 326 million of dollars that would be the financial loss, and not instead of 450 million. So then we achieved benefits around 124 million dollars. So this means around 28% of potential avoided loss. So that's what the main. This is the first important economic results, and then using these benefits together, putting together with the cost of the investment, we achieved the net present value of the nature-based solution investments for the water availability. So we developed 3 scenarios of economic viability, considering only water availability, considering also carbon benefits, so using the carbon credit price and the carbon social cost. So we get a net present value positive for the 3 of them scenarios. So with the water availability, we achieve 40 million of net present value. It's around 1.2 benefit cost ratio. And considering carbon credit price, we achieve 84 million if we consider to sell and to having credit from the restoration project in the area. And considering carbon social cost, which is a more policy public decision, we achieve around 177 million dollars. So these are the main results that brings interesting direction and to guide the policy agents. Okay, thank you, Justice and Claudio.
Wonderful. So as you can see from this, the cost benefit looks good just on the basis of the water benefits alone. And then if you were to add in the carbon rationale, it becomes even stronger. So at least by conventional infrastructural logic, this should check multiple boxes here. And so that leads me to my next question, Claudio. From your perspective, what does this study contribute in terms of the implementation of water security policies in Brazil and beyond?
Yeah, just as well. Besides, as say John mentioned earlier, besides bridging this gap between science and policy, I think the study clearly indicates that nature-based solution investments can provide meaningful resilience to water scarcity events in the case of the Cantareira system, but also elsewhere. So I think one of the points that we have discussed a lot during this, while we were designing the study, that we have devoted here like kind of almost 3 years in calibrating, validating all this hydrological models. So at the end, feels like we are saying something obvious, that if you improve the quality of the landscape, you will have better environmental services. But at the end, the obvious is something that needs to be reinforced when we are talking about political and policy making. So all the models we used here, they end up being like a navigational needle. They indicate where to head to, but we have to admit that they do not predict the future. So this is something to have very clearly. But these results, they must be taken as decision support tools. What we present here, these results, they come as a novel argument to subsidize the definition of public policies for water protection, reminding the evidences of the relation between increasing forest in the landscape and water quantity. They're very scarce in the literature. And this is one of the impacts of the study. Secondly, it brings one strong foundation for the sanitation sector to take the lead and incorporate watershed protection investments into its business model. After all, this is the sector that financially is gonna lose more, not to mention all the losses to other economic sector and people's quality of life. I think the report shows how the soil, I think Eileen has stressed this very much, how the soil plays this crucial role in promoting long-term water security. It is the sponge effect. So this is why we call it the invisible reservoir, because the soil is largely neglected among the water management decision makers. So we must admit that this long-term landscape planning and interventions, they are difficult to achieve solely within government leaders. They tend to shift in every election period. So we are always gaining and losing momentum, gaining and losing momentum. So added to that, the importance of the leadership of public and private sanitation sector stakeholders is also one of the impacts of the study. So we want to instigate decision makers to accept all the implied uncertainties as part of the challenge of designing policies aimed at climate adaptation. And want to emphasize this, far-looking water security. So we are talking about interventions that will take 20, 30 years to reach its maximum benefits. Then another point to be highlighted here is the role of development finance institution in providing this bulk short-term financing for nature-based solutions interventions to be implemented. After all, such kind of intervention will only deliver the ecosystem benefits in the long term. So there is no time to lose. Every year we lose in this, taking longer in the decision making, is another year that we lose in having these nature-based solutions providing all the ecosystemic functionality that it's expected. And ultimately, the investments in protecting source watersheds must be considered as part of the sanitation of the water sector operational costs, and thus be reflected into the water tariff structure. So this is our ultimate objective here. We're still working on this with São Paulo State Administration, with the water regulator, and the water utility. So this is ultimately the point where we want to get to, and create a case that can be replicated not only in Brazil, in other watersheds, in other medium to large cities, but also across the world.
Great. Thanks, Claudio. Thanks to the whole group here for sharing your respective parts of the study. We're basically right on time, which is great news. So if folks in the audience have any questions, please type them here in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them, and I'll prioritize accordingly. So again, there's a chat function and it should be at the bottom right of your screen. So if any questions were triggered by this presentation, please do let us know. And so the first one that came through is on which hydrological modeling programs were selected, and the actual question here is, what are the most important factors to choose when selecting your hydrological model for a study like this? And so I think that is some combination of Sejong and Eileen to start.
Yeah, I can start, and Eileen, you can add to what I have to say. So yes, we've developed a multi-model system really to represent our environmental system as accurately as possible, given limitations of understanding and data availability. But one of the most important thing for selecting model was that the models actually enhance our stakeholders' comprehension of the watershed processes, not confuse them. So one of the strategies that we utilize, because we work with the water utility company and they have their own hydrological simulation models, and that was the reason why we implemented HEC-HMS, which is water balance model they were using to run event simulation for different rain event magnitude and duration. So we took HEC-HMS and converted that to a long-term simulation model to understand 10, 20, 30-year implications of different landscape management. And that was really strategic, because our stakeholders already understand how HEC-HMS works. But HEC-HMS has some limitations. It's a rather simple model. If HEC-HMS is like impressionist painting, SWOT is more like realistic painting. It's got more hydrologic processes represented by SWOT, and SWOT also has the advantage of having more spatial resolution. So we can look at not just a watershed water balance, but we can also look at sub-basin water balance, which Eileen really championed. And when we developed SWOT along with HEC-HMS, we made sure that their calibration and validation processes mirror each other. So they are consistent model outputs that we're getting from SWOT and HEC-HMS. And that helped gain stakeholder trust of how the model operates. So yeah, that was the reason why. And when we also collaborated with academic collaborators, we understood that fog capture is a really important part of the water balance. So we employed Fiesta into our multi-model system. So that's when we developed multi-model system and selected models and incorporated data and parameterization, all with the mind that we're working with stakeholders, and models are there to help us communicate with the stakeholders. That was one reason why. Eileen, do you have anything to add to this?
I think no alone, but I want to reinforce that when we are doing some model and something like that, we need to understand very well the context, and we need to establish very well that question that we need to give the process. We need to know what we want to know to choose the model. If we are working with surface, you need to work with that model more like HEC-HMS, that is more for surface. If you are looking for show all the process, you need to looking for maybe a simple balance model. But this is very, very important to know exactly the question for the investigation. this will help a lot.
Wonderful. So next question comes from Brian. And Brian is asking about some, if you could, Bruna, tackle this explanation of the NPV value of water availability at 40 million, 1.2. What does that 1.2 times mean, and how does it break down?
We can go to the slide, please, Natalia, for the economic. Sure, Brian. So the NPV, it's the net present value. It's like the present value of future values, right? So we bring in the present to decide to make our economic decision in the present from future investments. So in this NPV, look in the graph on the right, we can see each component of the cost. So the blue bars are the costs. So we consider the implementation cost. That's why it's under parentheses in English. Implementation, maintenance, opportunity cost, which is this considering ecosystem services payment in the ground, and transaction costs and program management. Those are the components of the costs that were considered along the project. We consider the project around for a period of 35 years. Okay, so some of those costs are along all the periods. Some of them are only, for example, implementation and maintenance, or along some years in the beginning. And then we have the benefits. The benefits were estimated as I explained before. So we developed in 2 steps. So the water benefits that were estimated of 124 million. And then we considered that the drought, the episodes and drought events happens each 10 years. We make this assumption. Okay, so we made an assumption that these benefits were happen and comes and are considered along each 10 years. Okay, this is an important assumption. And so having those values, you consider the discount rate. I remember, I think that 4.85%. Okay, and then we achieved this number, this total of 40 million. Okay, so considering the benefits of the industry, the potential water benefits coming from avoided cost from the industry that is served by the Cantareira system is around 72 million, and the water benefits coming from the water supply and sewage sector treatment losses avoided, it's around 148 million. So with those benefits, water availability benefits, we get the 40 million. I don't know if it's clear enough, if it's so, but this is the...
Brian says thank you, so I think you did a great job, Bruna. Thank you, Bruna. Again, folks, if you have additional questions for the group, please put them in the chat and we'll endeavor to answer them. I have one, and if you wouldn't mind, Natalia, going to the prior slide to this, where it has the overall, yes, the Q&A slide, because this actually shows the landscape that we're talking about. And I know that in these kinds of quote unquote business case evaluations, one of the trickiest parts is selecting the right nature-based solutions to be evaluated in the portfolio. And so I think, Claudio, you might be the right person to talk about this, because you have a pretty deep history, you have a very deep history of the Brazil program and the different contexts where you all have tried out different implementations. So can you go into a bit more depth about which specific nature-based solutions were selected, why they were selected, and what the evidence base was that you needed to draw upon to be confident that these are the right ones to put in the study?
Yeah, sure. I think Eileen has brought a little bit of this, a glimpse of these scenarios we have developed. And well, we started from one assumption, that is what is stated by law, landscape law in Brazil, which is the forest code. So the forest code implies in the protection of buffer areas in streams and reservoirs. But according to also previous studies that we have developed and other researchers here in Brazil have developed, we know that such kind of intervention along the water courses, water streams, they surely have an impact on water quality. No debate on this. But we wanted to go further. We wanted to really go for this, search this evidence for the water quantity. So I think when we chose to use the Rios model to define inside the Cantareira system, where these most important areas are to be restored, and then we are talking about restoration of native vegetation, and there are different techniques to promote such restoration. Depending on the existing matrix, you can only leave it to regenerate as you exclude impact factors such as cattle grazing, and this reduces the cost. Or you can also promote an active restoration, planting seedlings and having a more intense management. It costs more. So for this region, our look was to what is possible to be made inside the territory of these 8 municipalities that can bring the biggest impact. And if we look at the different scenarios that Bruna has shown, in every one of the scenarios that we have tested, we found a positive impact in the economy and in water availability. So I think this is the point. We have also tested one scenario of best management practices, as I have mentioned before. The most part of this rural areas in the Cantareira system is basically degraded pasture. So one of the questions we also raised was, if this pasture is better managed with cattle ranching better techniques, how the impact would be. So this is several questions that we have to make, looking at the territory, looking at its peculiarities, and what's the best result we can get, and then turn this into political argument to make the decision-making process happen.
Great. And then I think we have to wrap up here shortly, but my last question to the group is, what did you find surprising during the elaboration of this analysis? So everyone came into this project with one set of expectations around what it would look like. And at the end of it, it turned it, like this is the case for every business case that involves nature-based solutions and watersheds that I've been a part of. You come in with one set of expectations of what the result will be, and then you do a bunch of work, and then it turns into something else. So can folks share about how the final result was different than the initial set of biases or assumptions that went into the start of the project?
I guess I can start. So I went in to conduct stakeholder engagement and co-develop models, and I don't speak Portuguese, but I found it surprisingly easy to work with my Portuguese collaborators, and stakeholders are really willing to share data and model with us because they share the common desire to have more resilient watershed. I think the memory of the drought was still pretty fresh, and I think ongoing climate change impacts are pretty apparent now. And second surprising factor was when I went in to model, I didn't know if water quantity benefits will be significant enough. I thought, nature-based solutions were mostly for filtration, but through a rigorous modeling process and quantifying the water storage capacity within soil columns was significant because it's a big watershed. And one of the things that model can do is make something invisible visible through compiling necessary data and implementing our best hydrological understanding of the watershed. So that was my answer.
Thanks, John. Any other? I wasn't expecting a stakeholder engagement reflection, but that's great. Any other reflections from the group?
Yeah, I must admit, adding to what John mentioned, that while we were talking to technical staff inside the water utility, there was this willingness to find solutions, to research, to investigate. But as we come to the decision-making process, this is something that we're still working. We're not giving up on this, but on the decision-making process, there's still always the pressure for more evidence, for more evidence, for more evidence. And there comes a point that we are losing time. The evidence is there, is on the table. Decision has to be made. Decision has to be taken. And I think this is one of the points we are right now with the results of the study in our hands.
Thanks. We are coming up on time, so I just wanted to thank the whole group here, as well as Natalia, for running slides and keeping time for us. As you can see, the link here is that there's a lovely QR code here. There's also a link that was posted in the chat earlier for reading on your own. As mentioned, this is a sort of a at-scale evaluation of what a nature-based solutions investment portfolio would look like for the Cantareira Water Supply System, and we think it's compelling, and we hope to sort of motivate policy makers and folks in the water industry to follow the recommendations over the coming months and years. And feel free to reach out to, for those in the audience that are more interested in specific aspects, feel free to reach out to us individually. I think most of us are on LinkedIn at a minimum, and get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again for all your time today, and looking forward to continue the conversation. Cheers, everyone.
You all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.